News and News with Clarence Ford.
Share your perspective.
Only on Cape Talk.
Welcome back. It is time for the Naked Scientist, that huge appointment. And I can see that from the very many questions that have come through already. So, a warm welcome, Dr. Chris Smith, lecturer at Cambridge University, our Naked Scientist. And it comes through intermittently, Chris. Welcome. But the question is asked often, and I think maybe from time to time we should remind people wanting to understand, and Felicity in this particular instance, why you are the Naked Scientist.
Good morning, Clarence. Good morning, Felicity. And the answer is, about 20 years ago, when the Naked Scientist got set up, it was me having avoidance behaviour when I was supposed to be writing up my PhD thesis. And I was standing at the sink doing the washing up, and I thought, what would make a really cool name for the next series of a radio programme that I'd started doing the year before, all about science. And I wanted to translate the new outing, not just from the radio, but onto the internet. And I needed something which I thought people would maybe see, read, smile about, and then think about. And so that's how it came about. It was really just what we thought would be a memorable name, and we've stuck with it ever since.
Yeah, and maybe just Felicity's imagination is completely disappointed by your answer at this moment in time. I think she listens to you and imagines you naked. Let's go to Keith's question. Keith writes, question for the Naked Scientist. A motivational doctor and long-distance athlete on Cape Talk recommends that you get 5 minutes of direct sunlight first thing in the morning. I've heard this before from other sources, and I've been doing it since I've had some spare time during the COVID lockdown. But almost every time I do it, I get hay fever. You cannot tell me I'm allergic to the sun. The same thing happens to my dear old mum. Why does this happen?
Well, first of all, why do we have the advice you should go and get some sunshine and get that sunshine early in the morning? Two reasons, really. One of them is to do with vitamin D. The other is to do with the effect of sunlight on your body clock. Vitamin D first. We make about 80% of the vitamin D that we have and need in our skin. Ultraviolet light, when it hits the skin, interacts with cholesterol, and it makes 7-dehydrocholesterol, which then goes on to make cholecalciferol, which is the starting product for making vitamin D. And vitamin D is chiefly for maintaining calcium levels, ensuring strong bones, but also helping your immune system to work. The other element of morning sunshine is that at the back of your eye, in the retina, there are rods and cones that turn the light waves that come into our eyes into brain waves so we can see. But there's also a population of cells that have a different chemical in them, which sees light, but it doesn't send the signals to the seeing parts of your brain. It sends the signals to the brain's hypothalamus, and specifically a part of the brain's hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And this is your body clock. And this is how you keep time. It's what gives you that instinct that it's late, it's early, it's time to go to bed, it's time to get up in the morning. And when you're asked to guess what time it is, you have an insight into roughly what time of day it must be. Your body clock is doing that, and it's telling every cell in your body what time of day it is, because it's sending not just nerve signals throughout the brain, but it's also secreting, through another part of the hypothalamus, chemicals into the bloodstream that then visit every cell in your body and keep every clock in those cells in sync as well. So time is really, really important to us. And that's the benefit of getting that sunshine burst in the morning, because we know the clock setting signal is really potent, bright blue light early on in the day. But why should you have an issue potentially with sneezing or what might be apparently hay fever symptoms early on in the day? I wonder if it's not hay fever, but something called the photic sneeze reflex. About 1 in 5 of us have this, which is that for some reason that's poorly understood, when we see bright light, some kind of spillover from the systems that probably control how big your pupils are, which are the things on the front of the eye that allow light into the eyeball and open and close to let more or less light in to balance the amount of light hitting the retina. For some reason, the circuitry that does that spills over some of its activity in some people into adjacent brain areas which are concerned with respiration and sneeze reflex. So when you look at the sun and bright light, it can trigger a sneezing sensation and make you start having sneezes. And some people actually use this when you're in that horrible situation where you want to sneeze and can't quite get yourself over the threshold. Looking at a bright light source will elicit a sneeze. And so it might be that what's being referred to here is the photic sneeze reflex, and looking at the bright sunshine early on in the day is triggering sneezing and leading to some people thinking perhaps they have an allergy. Perhaps they don't. Perhaps it's just that's making their nose tickle and them get the urge to sneeze.
Thank you for asking that question. It happens to me early in the morning. I'm up at 5 o'clock and the sun's rising just after 5. And then all of a sudden I start sneezing as well. And thank you to Chris Smith, Dr. Chris Smith, for answering that question. Now let's go to Solly's question. Solly wants to know about luck. Is it random or does it have a pattern?
Well, when I was a bit younger, I remember communicating with the rock musician Rick Wakeman, who actually lives not far from me, just up the road. And he, in his book, which was his autobiography called Say Yes, he had this line that he said he heard when I think he was in America on tour. And there was a radio station, a Christian radio station, playing some music, and someone on there said, "There's no such thing as luck. It's when opportunity meets preparation." And I thought that was such an amazing line. That's why I wrote to him and said, would you write an article for a magazine I'm editing? This is when I was a medical student. And he did. I was amazed to get this really hilarious and fantastic piece of writing back that we published. But it was all around it, or the starting premise was when opportunity meets preparation. That's what luck really is. Luck is something that we think exists because we say we got lucky, and sometimes there is chance. But usually what we call luck is where we have had a coincidence to which we have attached significance. Whew, I got away with that by the skin of my teeth. But what you don't remember are the 99 times out of 100 that the car ran you over and you were dead. So of course you're not going to remember, so you're going to attach more significance to the one time you got away with it. I'm talking metaphorically, of course. But also...
I think Solly's referring to the lotto this weekend.
Possibly, and I've never been lucky in lottos, and I just don't buy tickets, and I regard myself as a winner every week because I didn't buy a ticket because I wouldn't have won anyway. How's that for gambler's fallacy? The other point is, the point that Rick Wakeman was referring to, is you make your own luck. And this is that you put yourself in a position where you have loaded the dice, because that's the preparation. When you take a risk, you should always take a calculated risk. You weigh up the pros and cons, and if you think the odds are in your favour, it's worth a gamble if the odds are not too high. And that's where the opportunity meeting preparation bit comes in. You have a chance to take a risk, and if the preparation means you've loaded the dice well and truly in your favour, it's a calculated risk, and it may well be a worthwhile risk.
Neville's on the line, and he wants to talk about, luck. Neville, go ahead.
Hi guys. Just following up on this conversation about luck, I have a colleague who seems to have inordinate bad luck. Lots of little bad things tend to happen to him all the time. Sometimes they're quite big bad things. But I've always wondered, why is this guy kind of tends to attract what appears to be bad luck? So you were talking about good luck earlier. I want to know if there is such a thing as bad luck. Thanks.
Oh, that's such a good question. Such a good question. I'd love to know what sort of bad luck things before your colleague, but I think part of this is going to be reporter bias as well, which is that when I have good luck, I tend to tell people how lucky I've been today. And if you go back to the analogy, I said, well, you got away with running across the road and not being run over that time, and you couldn't tell us about the 99 out of 100 times it went wrong and you got flattened because you wouldn't be here to tell the tale. It might well be that most of us tend to talk about good luck, and some people do actually mention the bad luck, but most of us don't tend to talk about the times we weren't so lucky, because often it's humiliating, it's embarrassing, and it may be that your colleague is just extremely honest, or he just doesn't have very good preparation, so the opportunities afford themselves and his preparation isn't quite so on the mark, so he tends to make poorer judgments. So I think it's a combination of what people are sharing, and also some people do make bad choices, don't they? Let's be honest.
Then we have another voice note. Let's go there, Joe.
Morning, Clarence. Lovely show. I came in at the end of Dr. Chris's explanation about the sunshine and how important it is. But what happens to people that live in, where it's dark for long periods of time, or in I think it's in England, where the light is less. How does that work out? Thank you very much. It's Ronnie here from Stellies.
Very
Hi,
personal
Ronnie.
question there for you.
Yeah, terrific question. And I know all about that because it's not getting light until about 7:30 in the morning, and it's dark by 4 o'clock sunset. I just looked at my phone. 4 o'clock is sunset today. 4. And in some places, go a bit further north. I was in Scotland earlier this week. I was in Glasgow, and it was getting dark even earlier there. And if you were to go even farther north, places like Norway, you can go up to the Arctic Circle, and it stays dark for some months of the year continuously. And the answer is it's a really big problem. Now, I answered the previous question in 2 terms. I said about vitamin D and the fact that sunshine makes vitamin D in your skin, and you therefore get 80% of your vitamin D from about 15 minutes of sunshine a day on your face. That's what you need. Well, if you live somewhere where it is too dark, you become vitamin D deficient. The evidence is that the average person living in England by the end of winter is vitamin D deficient, and almost all of us living in high latitudes like the UK should probably supplement with a bit of vitamin D every single winter time because we become deficient. So that's one consequence. The other consequence, I mentioned that light, and blue light specifically early on in the morning, sets our body clock, and it sets you up for the day. And there is a phenomenon called seasonal affective disorder, quite literally SAD, where a reasonable fraction of the population, it might be as many as 1 in 5, will experience considerable depression and anxiety symptoms as you go into winter, probably because of an absence of sufficient light input early on in the day. And we know that many of these symptoms resolve if you give people a bright light box to sit in front of. So some people are literally prescribed light to make them feel better, and they'll sit there having their breakfast cereal with a nice bright light shining at them over the kitchen table, and this can alleviate many of those symptoms. So as well as setting the body clock, a nice bright burst of sunshine has a mood elevating effect, probably because it changes the hormones that the brain produces and signals to the rest of the body in a way conducive to making you feel good. So when I get off the aeroplane and set foot in South Africa and it's nice and bright and sunny, or I go to Australia, exactly the same thing, I immediately feel my mood lift. So I think that bright sunshine makes humans feel happier as well as giving us all those biochemical benefits. And perhaps they're there to reinforce each other. If it encourages you to get some sunshine, you'll make some vitamin D, which will make you healthier and happier. So it may be that it's all one big feedback loop.
Okay, we've got Faisal in with a voice note.
Hello, Dr. Chris. My knowledge on the science is not so great, but my understanding of the Big Bang Theory is that everything was compressed into this infinitely small space. And then from there, the Big Bang occurred, which unleashed this massive amount of energy and matter into the universe. Where did that matter come from to start off with?
Hi, Faisal. You're quite right that about 13.8 billion years ago, we can wind the cosmic clock back based on our understanding of how the universe is evolving and the rate at which it's doing so. We arrive at a point about 13.8 billion years ago when there must have been really time zero, this notional Big Bang, where there was the release of a huge amount of energy. But that's all it was. To start with, it was a massive amount of energy, and it immediately was released all at once at that point. And initially it was just energy. Everything was incredible amounts of heat, but it takes time before things have expanded. And as things expand and spread out, the amount of energy spreads out. Therefore, you've got less energy in one place. Therefore, the temperature, because that's the average energy in any given place, is falling. You get to a point where it's sufficiently cool, and this is a certain amount of time after the Big Bang. And I don't mean cool as in snazzy. I mean as in its temperature has dropped enough that you can begin to make matter. And remember that, as Einstein told us, E, energy, equals m, mass, times the speed of light squared. Energy and mass are interchangeable. So you can convert energy into matter. And this is what happens eventually, not long after the Big Bang. It's cool enough that you can then have stable matter existing and particles begin to exist stably from the energy that the Big Bang released. So the matter came from the energy of the Big Bang.
Ingrid is on the line. Go ahead with your question.
Good morning, both of you and everybody listening. I came across a clip on YouTube recently. It seemed to be a scientist of some standing who said that this notion that skin tones lightened because of brighter, more sunlight, which should have happened around 30,000 years ago when we migrated northward, is not backed up by the evidence. Apparently, that only started happening when we started living off farming. In other words, eating more plant-based foods.
The argument that's being made in that clip, I think, Ingrid, is that we know that our ancestors way back when, who were hairy, had pale skin. We know that as they evolved into anatomically modern humans, this happened in Africa, and they almost certainly evolved dark skin, because we know that dark skin is ancestral to lighter skin. Why did they do that? Well, the most likely explanation is that sun exposure degrades folic acid in the skin. We've talked about folic acid on this program before. Folic acid is one of the key factors in making DNA and growing cells rapidly. And if you don't have enough of it, you're highly likely, if you're a pregnant woman, to have a baby that has spina bifida, a neural tube defect. And that's why we fortify foods and advise women to increase their folic acid intake when they are pregnant. Folic acid is a B vitamin. You get it from leafy vegetables. So I think the argument that's being made here is, unlike other theories, which are that as people then migrate out of Africa, they go north, they go to higher latitudes where there is less sunshine, and now you're not losing folic acid from vitamin D, from UV exposure, because exposure to the sun degrades folic acid. Less sun means less folic acid degradation. That means less need to have dark skin, and having dark skin costs you metabolic energy, so you can save some energy and you don't have to worry about folic acid once you're at a high latitude. That was the argument for why people's skins became lighter again, and vitamin D became in shorter supply with less light. This other counterpoint that you are citing is arguing that actually perhaps one other driver was that when people began to harness agriculture, they had more access to more plants, and more access to more plants meant more folic acid from that source. But people would have been hunter-gatherers, and they would have been out and about doing anything and eating anything they could lay their hands on historically. We've always done that. We've always had a very broad diet. So I don't completely buy the argument that it was agriculture that made that happen. But I don't know what evidence they're basing their judgment about the change in skin colour at what particular time. I don't know what they're basing that on. But you can see where they're coming from, that perhaps they're arguing agriculture gives access to lots more plants, perhaps a broader repertoire of plants, and more folic acid via that route, and therefore the need to have darker skin via that route might have been absolved. But at the moment, I don't think we know. And that's the great thing about science and paleoanthropology, that there's enormous amounts to be learned, and we can have a lot of fun speculating.
And unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for The Naked Scientist this morning. And a big thank you to Dr. Chris Smith for this regular and very popular interaction every Friday just after 9:30. An opportunity for you to get that bugging question answered by The Naked Scientist.